Hello and welcome to the programme. This is NewsHour from the BBC World Service. I'm Paul Henley. We're coming to you live from London. Spain's health minister says an operation to get more than 100 passengers and crew off a cruise ship at the centre of a deadly hantavirus outbreak is proceeding normally. This is Monica Garcia speaking after the MV Hondius dropped anchor off the island of Tenerife just before passengers disembarked.
This operation is an unprecedented operation. I want to thanks to the WHO, to the ECDC, to all the administrations, all the countries that are involved. This operation requires the cooperation of 23 countries. I want to remark this. 23 countries are involved in this operation. I want to thanks all the institutions.
3 people have died, and virologists think that the 6 confirmed hantavirus cases on board were probably caused when the ship was visiting areas inhabited by infected rodents. Mar Martin is chief intensive care doctor at the Candelaria Hospital in Tenerife, and she told the BBC everything was being done to prevent further infection on land.
Everything is ready for patient care in this highly isolation unit, where we can treat a critically ill patient without any problems. All the necessary technology and staff training, which is very important, are available.
Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus is the head of the World Health Organization. He's at the port in Tenerife, along with those Spanish health officials.
This is not another COVID, and the risk to the public is low. They shouldn't be scared and they shouldn't panic. This is based on how the virus is behaving now, because this virus is well known, and there are assessments that have been done. But not only that, this, for several years, there were assessments on the behavior of the virus. So that's why we say the risk is low.
Let's speak live to the BBC's Guy Hedgecoe, who's also at the port in Tenerife. Welcome, Guy. Don't worry, don't panic. Is that advice being heeded where you are?
Hello, Paul. Well, certainly there has been quite a large amount of unease among the local population here in Tenerife over the last few days in the build-up to what is a very sort of complex, carefully choreographed operation to receive this boat. A lot of people I've spoken to have said they are concerned about the arrival of the Hondius. And I think that the authorities, the Spanish authorities and the World Health Organization have been desperately keen to, in response to that, to try and reassure people. So that's why we've been receiving so much information about the measures being taken to ensure that this whole operation is safe, that there's no interaction with local people, and this message that there's no risk, essentially, for local people. But people are concerned, I think, anyway, and I think they'll be concerned until the boat has left.
What have you seen in terms of comings and goings at the port?
Well, so far we've seen the first group of passengers who disembarked were the 14 Spaniards on board. They disembarked in these small boats that were taken from the cruise ship to the island of Tenerife, to the port. And then they were driven to the airport, which is just 10 minutes away from the port, driven in a so-called bubble bus. They were disinfected once they arrived at the airport before getting onto the plane. They didn't go into the airport terminal. They had just basic belongings with them. Their main luggage was left on the cruise ship. And then they boarded the plane and left. And that's a process that's going to be repeated with other nationalities throughout the day.
Many thanks. Guy Hedgecoe live from the portside in Tenerife. Let's speak to Diana Rojas, who is the head of the Emerging Zoonosis and High Impact Epidemic Unit at the World Health Organization. She's also in Tenerife. Diana, welcome. What will happen to the passengers after they've left the ship? Where will they go? How long will they have to isolate for?
Thank you very much for your question. So the global guidance that we have published recently, so each of the passengers and of course the crew will have to have a quarantine of around 42 days, given the long incubation period of this virus, and then they will go into further testing once they arrive to their home country and they are finally expatriated. So that's the process. During these 42 days, the fever or developing of symptoms will be assessed, or making sure if there are symptoms that are appearing, they can be notified to the public health authorities to guarantee the patient improvement and safety, and of course to avoid further spread of the virus.
And how strict do quarantine conditions need to be? Can they be enforced in a health institution? Can patients be isolated at home?
Well, that's an excellent question. What we are recommending are people they can be isolated at home, wearing a face mask, a protective mask to protect others from the household from being infected. However, each of the countries is completely autonomous in how they want to, if they want to enforce or not enforce the 42 days of quarantining. So we are recommending to limit movement and stay home kind of activities, and wearing protection to prevent further spread inside the household. So there are countries that are taking the passengers and the crew into healthcare facilities, but there are some others that are not. But most of them are taking them to healthcare facilities.
The figure that will alarm some people is that 40% of people who contract hantavirus die of it. Now, obviously, the World Health Organization is trying to reassure people, tell them not to worry, not to panic. But the fact that the head of that organization has turned up himself in Tenerife suggests it's a high priority for the WHO too.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, also it's important when we estimate the case fatality rate, or the proportion of people who are infected that usually die, is that remember that this disease is transmitted in very rural settings, that they might be a bit isolated from high complexity healthcare facilities. So if you are in that situation, and if you get sick, and if you don't make it to the ICU, then people will be more likely to die. So please keep that in mind, because in most of these countries, they will be in places where they will get all the care, and if symptoms develop, probably the case fatality rate will be lower, depending on the type of care and the quality of care that they receive. Of course, we are here, and it's a priority. It's a cluster of cases in a cruise. But as there are 23 nationalities from passengers and crew in the ship, it became we needed to implement the international health regulations. That's exactly what are the regulations that tell us how to coordinate these kind of activities when outbreaks happen. So that's what we are here, and we are just we are currently collaborating and supporting, but the Spanish government, and the European Union and other actors on the field are also playing an incredible role and leading this unprecedented activity.
Many thanks for coming on the programme. That's Diana Rojas, who's head of the Emerging Zoonosis Unit at the World Health Organization, speaking to us live from Tenerife. Now, it's been widely assumed that the source of this hantavirus infection on board the ship was the point at which many passengers and crew embarked, which was the port of Ushuaia at the southern tip of Argentina. BBC Mundo's Matías Zibel is there, and I asked him what he'd been able to establish.
I was talking to local epidemiologists, especially the person, Juan Facundo Petrina, who is in charge of all the investigation. And what he answered to me is that he thinks the hypothesis that the tourist got contact with the virus in Tierra del Fuego is the less likely.
He goes as far as to say it's a smear campaign on the region, doesn't he?
He didn't tell that to me. He was really polite, but he said that Tierra del Fuego has not registered any case of hantavirus, never in its history. He answers that the endemic areas of the Patagonia, of the Argentinian Patagonia, are like 1,500 and 2,000 kilometers to the north, he reminded me that Tierra del Fuego is an island. So if there was any kind of migration of the species, the specific species of mice that transmit the virus, they have to cross the Magallanes Strait. So he was really willing to give all the arguments possible to say, look, I don't rule it out, but I don't think the contagious happened here.
We've been talking about this disease as one transmitted by rodents. This is an interesting detail you're finding out. It's transmitted, in fact, by a mouse, a long-tailed mouse, to be precise.
Yes, absolutely. In Argentina, they call it the ratón colilargo, and it's a specific mouse that transmits the disease. But there are so many cases of hantavirus, or so many areas possible to get contagious in Argentina, because we have the south, the northwest, the northeast, and the central part of the country. You have already south of Chile. You have hantavirus cases in Uruguay, in Bolivia, in Brazil. So I'm not sure if it's the same case is for every scenario, but here in Patagonia, they call it the ratón colilargo or long-tail mouse.
And where you are in Ushuaia is a very important port for the cruise ship industry. Might that industry be affected now?
We will not if it's affected now, but because the season has finished in April. You know, the season of cruise ships take place in summer. So it goes from September, October, November to April. So we will be more sure about how this hypothesis and how this outbreak affected the industry in the future, in the next season, in the next summer. There is some winter season for Ushuaia and Tierra del Fuego, but it's not cruises. It's coming here to ski, for example. What we know, because we talked to the touristic authorities, is that they haven't got any formal cancellation of any kind of trip. They say they receive a lot of consultation, a lot of questions from international operators, but officially they don't have any cancellation. But at the same time, it's true that the season has finished, so we will not be clear about the effect of this drama until next year.
That was Matias Sibel from BBC Mundo reporting to us from Ushuaia in southern Argentina. You're with the BBC World Service. We're live from London. This is NewsHour. Coming up, the book from Brazil with the story of the criminal underworld that's shortlisted for the International Booker Prize.
It is chilling. It is suspenseful. It's written with a sort of swiftness and brevity. It also has touches of a humanizing lightness, moments of irony, moments of humor.
The headlines this hour: the first flight carrying people evacuated from the MV Hondias, the cruise ship struck by a deadly hantavirus outbreak, has now left Tenerife. Pakistan's prime minister's vowed to end terrorism in the country after a suspected Islamist car bomb attack killed 15 police officers. More on that very soon. I'm Paul Henley with NewsHour, live from the BBC. Now, police in the northwest of Pakistan say more than 100 militants have set off a car bomb at a checkpoint and opened fire on officers, killing at least 15, injuring 3. An Islamist militant alliance said it carried out the attack. The region's been gripped during recent years by militant activity. The Taliban, though, the government in Kabul, regularly at odds with Islamabad, denies Pakistan's accusations that Afghan territory is now a safe harbour for those who want to attack Pakistan. Let's speak live to the BBC's South Asia analyst, Anbarasan Etirajan. Anbarasan, welcome to the studio. This particular attack seems to be on a larger scale than usual. What more can you tell us about it?
It's the latest attack in a series of violent incidents in northwest Pakistan. That region is bordering Afghanistan. And for the past few months, there were no major attacks as such. Now, this seems to be a well-coordinated attack, according to Pakistani officials. Now, initially, what the Pakistani authorities are saying, a vehicle loaded with explosives rammed into this security post in Bannu district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. That triggered a huge explosion in which many officers were killed on the spot itself. And soon after that, more than 100 militants were involved in this attack. They targeted the security post as well as the reinforcements which were sent to this area to help the besieged troops. And one officer was saying that the militants were also using quadcopters. Basically, they were using the smaller drones in this attack. So now it shows how technically they are savvy in using these things for these attacks. And when the reinforcements finally reached, the militants retreated, and they retreated three police officers from the rubble. They were seriously injured. And then only they came to know about the scale of this attack. So it was one of those very daring attacks, despite the presence of thousands of security personnel in that area.
And we're talking about an area close to the Afghan border. And I mentioned that Pakistan blames Afghanistan for essentially allowing militants the use of its territory. To what extent does that claim hold?
Now, there have been long-standing accusations by Islamabad that many of the Islamist militants who are operating from this particular northwestern part or even in Balochistan further south, they were getting some sort of help, basically safe haven for these militants. They're operating from the border areas of Afghanistan, that they carry out these cross-border attacks. And that was one of the reasons why they were not able to prevent that increased tensions between these two sides. However, the Taliban authorities have been strongly denying that they were providing any support. So one of the biggest groups in that region which is operating is the Pakistani Taliban group, a loose alliance of various Islamist militants. But this particular attack was claimed by another alliance called Ittihad al-Mujahideen. But because it is a very porous border, militants keep crossing between both sides, and that led to border tensions, with Pakistan carrying out attacks on Afghan border areas and then Taliban returning. Scores of people have been killed in the last few months, and again, this incident will once again increase the tensions between the two countries.
Questions about Pakistan hosting those talks between the US and Iran, with limited success, it has to be said, so far?
Pakistan has been trying their best to convey messages. Basically, they were passing on messages between the two sides, but they do have limitations because there are things beyond their control. But it has also once again put Pakistan's ability to talk to people, to connect various people, because that shows how they have relationship on the one side, the neighbor with Iran, on the other side, the US.
Many thanks, Ambarasan Etirajan. Now, this year marks the 35th anniversary of the release of the film The Silence of the Lambs, which is widely regarded as one of the best thrillers of all time. It brought audiences a memorable villain in the form of the cannibalistic serial killer Hannibal Lecter. As part of 35th anniversary celebrations, the film has been shown once again in cinemas in parts of the US. From New York, Tom Brook has been looking back at how he covered the film at the time of its release, including interviews he did with the stars, Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster.
The psychological horror film The Silence of the Lambs was unleashed upon the world in 1991. 35 years later, with its memorable performances by Sir Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster and the taut direction of the late Jonathan Demme, it still holds up as a picture. This is how I reported on the film just prior to its release in UK cinemas in 1991.
It's widely agreed that The Silence of the Lambs has to be one of the most shockingly powerful psycho thrillers to have arrived at American cinemas in recent years. Jodie Foster plays FBI trainee Clarice Starling, who's been enlisted to visit a notorious serial killer, Dr. Hannibal Lecter, portrayed by Anthony Hopkins, in the hope that he may be able to provide her with clues in tracking down another multiple murderer, nicknamed Buffalo Bill.
What is your worst memory of childhood?
Death of my father.
Tell me about it and don't lie, or I'll know.
Dr. Lecter is not just a killer, but also a psychiatrist. He agrees to help Clarice Starling, but only if she'll reveal some of her own private thoughts to him. A strange, troubling intimacy develops between them, generating a tension that inhabits the entire film.
Some of the things that I think are the most tense are these very long, very intricate, very subtextual, intelligent conversations between Dr. Lecter and Clarice Starling that are done in very extreme close-ups.
Census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Dr. Lecter may well become one of the more monstrous characters to emerge from the cinema in recent years. An evil man who Anthony Hopkins makes all the more menacing by emphasizing his intelligence and charm.
Yes, I stressed that. I mean, I wanted to play all that side of it. I didn't want to play the evil side. If you're playing a madman, if you play the madness, it's ludicrous. How do you play madness? So I opted for playing the really super sane side of him, the highly civilized section of Hannibal's mind. And then all the evil that he is there for the audience to make up for their own minds. And people talk a lot about him before he's seen. So I didn't actually have to act out anything fearful.
Quite apart from its impressive impact at the box office, The Silence of the Lambs has become one of the most talked about films in a long time. People have been terrified out of their wits. One couple who went to watch the film in San Francisco were so frightened by it that they refused to leave the cinema until they were escorted to their car. In content, the picture is quite unlike previous work from director Jonathan Demme.
The first time I spoke with Jodie, she talked about the idea of a character who identifies with the victim in a very passionate way. Given the degree of Clarice's desperation, Lecter really goes for the full court press inside her head.
But you're not more than one generation from poor wire trash, are you, Agent Starling?
The Silence of the Lambs went on to win 5 Oscar trophies in major categories. Apart from the criticism that it brought forth from some people who perceived the serial killer Buffalo Bill in the picture as a transgender character who reinforced negative stereotypes, its legacy as a film has been largely positive. And quite apart from its recent re-release in cinemas, it's now being reinvented as a stage play which will have its world premiere later this year.
The BBC's Tom Brooke reporting from New York. Don't forget, if you want to listen to NewsHour but missed the live broadcast, there's an online version of the programme available, updated twice a day. BBC NewsHour podcast is what to search for. This is Paul Henley with NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Welcome back to NewsHour. Now, news of an unusual musical collaboration between humans and animals. A choir here in the UK has created a song featuring the sounds of humpback whales living off the coast of Iceland. Helena Burke has been finding out more.
Over the past few years, a research team from Whalewise has been studying and recording the humpbacks in a remote Icelandic fjord. Rebecca Douglas, the president of the Conservation Charities Board of Trustees, went to see the work firsthand.
We're capturing research and evidence, basically, of the fact that they're here and they exist because potentially there might be quite a large industrial port being put in, and it's important to know what's in the area and be able to advocate for the whales.
The team installed an underwater microphone to record whale song from the depths. When she's not helping to protect singing whales, Rebecca joins singing humans at a community choir in the town of Margate in England. It was there that the choir master, Hughie Gavin, had the idea of getting everyone involved in writing a song.
There's 140 in the choir, and what we did is create this portal, and people could put their words that were inspired by the sea into that portal. And then I had this whole database of oceanic, watery words, and I kind of wove together some lyrics.
Hughie then mixed the choir's song with the sounds captured from the deep.
This is the first whale I've had as a featured artist on a track, definitely. But it worked perfectly in the track. So the piece ends with the humpback whales, but also there's lots of moments within the piece that it's almost like they're singing with the choir.
The song, which is called Wash Over Me, will be released later this year to coincide with World Oceans Day. Rebecca says the experience has made her emotional and hopes it will help remind people of the importance of protecting marine life.
I'm always blown away by that fact that we're a blue planet, 71% of the planet is water. We're made up of a similar amount as humans, and so, you know, the water is something that connects all of us through the cycles of life, no matter where we are. And I think that just sort of transcends and is that thread through World Ocean Day, because it's vital for all of us.
Rebecca Douglas and the song Wash Over Me, ending that report from Helena Burke. It's part of the World Service's Happy Pod series. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC. I'm Paul Henley. Let's turn now to Beijing, where President Trump is expected to arrive later this week ahead of a two-day summit with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, which starts on Thursday. It will be Mr. Trump's first visit to China since he returned to office, and it comes after months of escalating trade tension between Washington and Beijing. In its latest move, the US last week sanctioned 3 Chinese commercial satellite companies for allegedly providing support to Iran during the ongoing war. What will be on the agenda then at this summit, and are the two sides likely to make meaningful progress? I'm joined live by Steve Sang, who is director of the SOAS China Institute in London. Welcome, Steve. This comes later than expected, this visit, because it was postponed in March due to the Iran war. It sounds less than promising start.
Well, yes and no. It was postponed, but then both sides want to have this summit to happen. And I think both sides want to make a success of the summit.
What will both presidents be looking to achieve?
Well, a success, so that Donald Trump can say that he's got a win, and Xi Jinping can also say his equivalent of having a win. But neither side is likely to make serious concessions to the other on very substantive matters, not in any way that can reduce what they can claim as a win in their domestic audience.
President Xi has been having a lot of wins on the international stage recently, hasn't he? With national leaders flocking to the Chinese capital to be seen with him, to be presented, actually as a direct result of Donald Trump annoying them. We're talking about American allies, Canada, European countries.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right there. Donald Trump may have been a major headache for China and for Xi Jinping in his second term in office, but Donald Trump has also been a godsend, or shall I say a max send to China, because Donald Trump is making it possible for China to achieve some of its major long-term objectives, like dividing the Democratic Alliance and discrediting the United States in the international community as a whole.
How would you describe US-Chinese relations during the second Trump presidency?
It's a difficult relationship, but that is a relationship which is being managed effectively and therefore not likely to spiral out of control. I think we saw that in the way how they managed the tariff war. Donald Trump started off in a very aggressive way, and Xi Jinping, I think, was being caught by surprise. He took a robust stand, and Donald Trump backed off. And from there, they could see that there is a way to find a way forward.
China is extremely keen, as most countries in the world are, to see an end to the operations, the military operations in the Middle East. What pressure can it put on Washington?
Well, China will be will definitely want an end to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Continued tension between Iran and the United States is not a major concern for China. China simply wants the Iranians not to lose, and the Iranians are not in any sense losing at the moment. So they will be able to negotiate, if they are going to be negotiating with Americans over Iran, they will be in a good position that the Americans are not having a lot of cards, and the Chinese will maximize the fact that the Americans don't really have a lot of cards to play. Trump wants the war to end, but is not able to end it simply on his own terms.
There can be no lecturing from Washington, can there, on not starting wars? That might be a relief to China on the subject of Taiwan.
The Taiwan issue, I think the Chinese feel a bit rather more confident. They would perhaps go beyond that and would be trying to nobble Donald Trump to see whether Donald Trump would go as far as to say that Donald Trump does not support an independent Taiwan. But they are not going to be prepared to pay a substantial price to get Donald Trump to say that. I don't think they are worried about Trump lecturing China over the risk of starting a war over Taiwan. The Chinese are not preparing to start a war over Taiwan anytime soon.
Do you think President Xi is personally pleased by the fact that Donald Trump is making himself unpopular with his allies?
No question about that. He is.
Has he demonstrated it? How do you know?
Well, I have conducted a major study on the global strategy that Xi Jinping has devised for China, and one of which is to make China winning support in the international community at the expense of the United States. And that is what Donald Trump has delivered in terms of discrediting American credibility, particularly by his management of the conflict with Iran, and therefore it is delivering a major strategic objective for Xi Jinping. So I think it's reasonable to conclude that yes, he is pleased with that.
Many thanks for coming on the programme. Steve Sang, who is director of the SOAS China Institute here in London. We are going to hear live now from the winner of this year's Pulitzer Prize for History, who's written a timely book telling the story of the US Constitution, We the People. A history of that Constitution is by Jill Lepore. It is praised by Pulitzer judges as lively, engaging. It's published as the US celebrates, of course, the 250th anniversary of its founding. And as many people, including the author, say the nation is in the midst of a growing constitutional crisis. Jill Lepore joins us now live from Vermont. Welcome, Jill. Explain the nature, maybe, of this crisis first, would you?
Well, I think that we have a constitution whose legitimacy is in question for some basic reasons. Political scientists will say a constitution that can no longer be amended is no longer considered legitimate in the eyes of the people. And the U.S. Constitution, which has one of the lowest amendment rates in the world, hasn't been meaningfully amended since 1971. And also for newer reasons, which have to do with violations of the separation of powers. So when our Constitution can no longer be amended by the people, it is subject to reinterpretation by the Supreme Court, which amends it by its acts of interpretation. And that's not actually written into the Constitution. That's itself a kind of usurpation of power, although it's a longstanding one. But more recently is the usurpation of power by the executive branch. President Trump appears to believe that if he says it's in the Constitution, it is, and if he says it isn't, it is not.
Would you support the Constitution being easier to amend?
Efforts to make the Constitution easier to amend are an evergreen in the pile of failed constitutional amendments. The only way to make it easier to amend is to amend it, and it seems very unlikely to happen. But I do think people who've made the claim, from the very start, that the bar was set too high are just empirically correct.
What amendments are you talking about?
There have been about 12,000 bills introduced on the floor of Congress to amend the Constitution over the course of its history.
What amendments would you like to see?
I'm not really a policymaker. I'm a historian. I think some of the amendments that have come closest to ratification remain important. The Equal Rights Amendment, guaranteeing equal rights regardless of sex or gender, was first introduced to Congress in 1923. It passed in 1972 and then later failed of ratification, although there's an ongoing legal debate in the U.S. of whether, in fact, it was ratified. I think the failure of the Equal Rights Amendment has had longstanding consequences for American civic life. The attempt to abolish our electoral college, the sort of odd means by which we elect our president, and we can not commonly, but sometimes do and have and are more likely to increasingly often elect a president who did not win the majority of who did not win the popular vote. Efforts to abolish the electoral college or to reform that have come quite close, have, passed one branch of Congress and then not the other. I think that still is an important amendment. There are a lot of efforts to overturn Citizens United, which was a Supreme Court decision that gave a free hand to political spending. There are ongoing efforts to use a constitutional amendment to appeal the Supreme Court's fairly recent presidential immunity decision.
Right. You haven't actually by name mentioned President Trump yet, I don't think. How exactly has he tested the U.S. Constitution?
Trump famously, maybe 2 years ago now, in a television interview, was asked if he considered it his duty to uphold the Constitution. And he said, I don't know. In fact, it is his duty. It is part of the oath of office. It is in the language of the oath that he takes. In the U.S., our written Constitution has largely like a kind of fetishistic role in political discourse. People are always charging one another of doing unconstitutional things or saying, and it's kind of a proxy for political debate. For Trump, it's not that, which is sort of interesting. I mean, he just doesn't. It's just not relevant to his consideration.
Well, you say he appears to believe the Constitution is just what he says it is. What do you mean?
Well, the birthright citizenship case that was argued in the Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago is a good example of this. It became important within the Trump administration to pretend that birthright citizenship is not in the Constitution. It is, in fact, in the 14th Amendment, which was ratified in 1868 after the U.S. Civil War and has uniformly been understood to be in the Constitution. There's a wacky legal argument that the 14th Amendment doesn't say what it says. And although the Supreme Court is quite likely to disagree with that opinion that was presented by the Trump Justice Department, it's a fascinating attempt to simply by fiat declare this is in the Constitution, that is not in the Constitution. Presidential immunity is in the Constitution. It's not. The Supreme Court agreed. Birthright citizenship is not in the Constitution. The Supreme Court is likely to say no. But these are examples, I think, of the president simply deciding that he is the decider of constitutionalism itself.
We're quite close up for a lot of international listeners to the US Constitution. I'm just wondering how well known it is to US citizens, how much of the detail people are every day familiar with.
There was a wonderful book written on the 200th anniversary of the Constitution, whose main argument was that the central paradox of American history is that Americans cherish their Constitution like no other people, and they know less about it than any other people know about their own Constitution. It's partly because we have a kind of reverential genuflection to the founding and that moment in 1787 when the document is crafted in the summer of 1787, Philadelphia. And then we have a kind of a deference to the Supreme Court. And there's very little knowledge of the history in between, right? So a lot of people know about the current Supreme Court docket, and they know about the ideas in the original Constitution, but the centuries of history in between are largely unfamiliar, which is why I wrote the book.
Many thanks. That's Jill Lepore, author of We the People, A History of the US Constitution. It's the BBC World Service. I'm Paul Henley with NewsHour, live from the BBC World Service. Time now for the next in our series featuring the International Booker Prize shortlist. The prize of $70,000 is due to be announced here in London in the next couple of weeks, and it's always split equally between the winning author and their translator. As is tradition on NewsHour, we're lucky enough to speak to all those on the shortlist, and today's book comes from Brazil, On Earth as It Is Beneath is written by Anna Paula Meyer, translated by Padma Viswanathan. It's a tale of a hitman named Bronco Gil, who's been held in a rundown prison colony in a remote part of Brazil. Built on the site of a slave burial ground, the prison has become, as the title of the book suggests, a grim hellscape, thanks in large part to its warden, Melquiades, who has made a sport of releasing inmates every full moon, then hunting them down. Here's a snippet.
Melquiades shouts at the men to run and presses the stopwatch. In 15 seconds, both men are out of sight. When 30 seconds are up, Melquiades tucks the stopwatch into his pocket and runs straight ahead. Typically, the prisoners split up. They think their chances of escape are better if they go in opposite directions. Hunting men is a little more painstaking than hunting wild animals.
A moment read there from On Earth as It Is Below, read by Zelia Mendes-Jones. In fact, my colleague Rebecca Kesby spoke to the writer, Anna Paula Meyer, and the translator, Padma Viswanathan. Anna Paula explained first the origins of her story.
Boa tarde, Rebecca.
When I decided to write this book, I wanted to talk about the prison system, especially from Americas. And during my research, I wanted to understand this word, and it wasn't possible to talk about this subject without talking about colonialism, slavery, and the genocide against the indigenous people here.
E, diante disso, eu acho que o livro...
And with this book, I think it moved forward this frontier, what is happening here in Latin America, and reflect what is happening in other parts of the world.
I mean, this character of the warden in particular is really central to the book. I mean, he seems quite unhinged, a bit of a sadist, really. He runs the prison like his own fiefdom with absolute power. There's not really any oversight. Did you base some of the characters, at least, or the setup on any actual real-life examples?
Não da vida real, exatamente.
Not a single real-life person, but I was inspired by testimonies that I read in the press, and this is historical past from the region that helped me to create this character.
And Padma, if I can come to you, what were your first impressions of the book?
That it is chilling, it is suspenseful. It's written with a sort of swiftness and brevity that I really wanted to try to replicate in the spirit of the original, to evoke on the page. It also has touches of a humanizing lightness, moments of irony, moments of humor that I felt were also critical to the world that Ana Paula has created.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about, Ana Paula, actually, because when you are grappling with a subject matter that is this grim, and as you say, you know, the hints of historic violence in the book, the slavery, the generational aggression, it must be a bit of a challenge for a writer to make sure that there is a momentum or a flow that does bring in other elements of humanity. Otherwise, it could get quite a difficult read, I should think. Were you conscious of that when you were writing it?
Esse livro é livro que...
This book comes from other books. My books are connected. So this character, Bronco Gil, he came before. And this brotherly love, it's what connected my books. I think this is the main thing in my books that connects people, this brotherly love.
Dentro da própria literatura.
Padma, I mean, Ana Paula there mentioned that some of the characters in her books do pop up in other stories that she's written. And I don't know whether you sort of had to go and visit those characters in the other books so that you could sort of sew it together.
I actually tried somewhat to almost forget that there was a relation between this book and the others, in part because you don't need to read one to get the others. They exist in the same world, but the connections between them are almost like Easter eggs for people who have read one or the other book. So I have translated another book by Ana Paula that's coming out later this year, and Bronchogil, for example, is referred to but doesn't actually physically appear.
Ana Paula, I should mention that you are a screenwriter as well. You've written for the screen several times over, I think. And this is a very sort of intense scenario that you've got these characters in this hideous prison under very pressurized conditions. It's quite dramatic. They're all cooped up together. Was that something of a device that maybe you borrowed from a screen kind of approach, that sort of sense of drama? Does it help to sort of bring that element of your writing into building a story in a novel like this?
Forte influência do cinema.
So I have a really strong influence from cinema. I always have. And my writing has always been very cinematic because it's based on the images. My history as a screenwriting started after my career as a book writer. So my influence is very based on the cinema. So this book, has a lot of influence of Escape from Alcatraz and also The Penal Colony from Kafka. So my influence came from before.
Na construção desse livro.
And what would it mean, Ana Paula, if you did win this prize? What would it mean for you, but maybe also for other writers from your region?
For me, as a Brazilian writer, this is huge, not only for Brazil, but for Latin America and for Portuguese language, because Portuguese doesn't have any frontier with other languages.
And how about you, Padma?
While I would be thrilled to win, I admit that a little part of that thrill would be on behalf of this author, on behalf of Ana Paula and her original work as well. A huge part of it, actually.
That was translator Padma Viswanathan. You also heard from author Ana Paula Meyer. Their novel On Earth as It Is Beneath has been nominated for this year's International Booker Prize. Thanks to Jessica Cruz for translating. Next week we'll feature the final 2 Booker Prize nominees internationally. Thanks for listening to this edition of NewsHour. Bye-bye for now.